Okay, Marg, I'm going to invite you up to introduce our guest.
We're fortunate. Kate Lines is going to be giving us a presentation this morning, and I want to give you a little bit of her background. She's been one busy lady. Kate Lines was a member of the Ontario Provincial Police for over 33 years. In 2010, she retired at the rank of Chief Superintendent in charge of the OPP's Investigation and Support Bureau. Throughout Kate's career, she worked as a police officer on uniform patrol, undercover drug investigations, intelligence, and major crimes such as homicide and sexual assault. In 1990 and 91, she was trained by the FBI to become Canada's first female criminal profiler. She went on to be voted Canadian Police Leader of the Year in 2004. Kate is now a licensed private investigator specializing in corporate internal investigations, including workplace harassment, violence, and human rights. She teaches as well on an online criminal profiling course and is also the volunteer board chair of the national nonprofit Victim Justice Network. In last June 2016, Kate received an honorary Doctor of Laws degree from the University of Ontario Institute of Technology for being a pioneer of women in policing and her leadership in criminal profiling. Kate's autobiography, Crime Scene, when I first heard, I was spelling scene, S-C-E-N-E, and I thought, oh, it isn't that, it's crime, S-E-E-N. From patrol cop to profiler. The name of the book, of course, is Crime Scene, and the subtitle is My Stories from Behind the Yellow Tape, published by Random House. And it became a national bestseller the following week. Can you imagine? Kate's memoir focuses on the courageous journeys of victims, their families, and the dedication of law enforcement and support service providers. As you've no doubt noticed, Susan and Susan's sister, they're Kate's helpers today, and they have some copies available for those of us who are interested. Now, this is an aside. This is a personal experience when it comes to Kate. After my cohort, Lynn and I, heard about Kate and really wanted her to come to speak to us, I had a problem. My problem was I couldn't find her.
She's undercover.
Well, and I wondered if she had gone undercover again. But following my 5th attempt, she telephoned me. And here she is, Kate Lines.
Thank you, Margaret, and it's an absolute pleasure to be with you here this morning. Probably for the first 45 minutes or half an hour, maybe 45 minutes, I'll share some stories with you that are not in the book, and have an opportunity for questions and answers at the end, if that's okay with you folks. So I guess maybe if I was to start at the beginning for me is in Ennismore, Ontario. So I grew up on a farm on Pigeon Lake. Went to a one-room schoolhouse initially before we moved to the big 4-classroom school in Ennismore, in the hamlet of Ennismore. And grew up on a farm, didn't have a lot of money. Things were pretty tight when I was a youngster, but our family had lots of relatives in the area. And for probably the first 5 or 6 years, I only ever had one friend, and that was my cousin who lived next door in the farm next door. So it wasn't really till I went to school that I ever had any interaction with other children. If I was to jump ahead a little bit and thinking back as to how I would possibly become involved in the policing career that I had, I guess the earliest start was at Crestwood Secondary School here in Peterborough. And an officer came to speak to my grade 11 class, and it's one of those, strong memories for most people. I'm a visual person, so I remember where I was sitting in the classroom, and I remember looking at him as talking. And it was the age of when drugs were just being introduced to our high schools. And I remember being taken by that officer because he wasn't there to lecture to us. Kids were getting very sick from some of the drugs that were being sold on Peterborough streets. And he was there to share what those drugs looked like, asking us not to be involved in that kind of thing, but most important to him was that we were safe. And that sort of attitude, I don't know if he would have been a Peterborough City officer or an OPP officer. At that time, of course, as a young 16-year-old, you don't realize the different law enforcement agencies, that kind of thing. But that officer's approach was something that stayed with me as I moved, through the rest of my high school years and then into university. So when I graduated from Crestwood in 1974, I didn't know what I wanted to do at that time. So the only thing that seemed to make any sense to me was, why don't I just sort of continue on in school. Again, not a lot of money at home, but I was able to get the maximum grants and loans, and was accepted into the University of Toronto at Arundel College. So still thinking back at that, at that grade 11 experience, I thought maybe law was something that I should pursue. So that was my goal when I entered the university, actually Arundel College, or University, UTM they call it, University Toronto Mississauga campus on Mississauga Road. And if I was to jump ahead to graduation time, to be brutally honest, I would have to say that having been away for the first time, living away from home, I enjoyed the extracurricular life at college. And I played a lot of sports. So my marks were not, these are all the things I told my parents, at least, when it came time to graduate, that, especially that the sports had caused me to miss a lot of classes. So I was not in the greatest of positions to be looking to get into a law school, and I knew the reality of my situation. But as fate always intervenes, shortly before I graduated, my roommate got a call, and her cousin lived in the West End of Toronto, and he was calling her to see if she could come and babysit for him. So she said that yes, she would, and she asked me if I wanted to go with her, and I said sure. And so on that particular evening, her cousin spent probably the first 45 minutes of the evening before we ever started our babysitting assignment, I realized he was a police officer. He worked for 22 Division of Toronto Police. And so we chatted for a bit before they went out, and then when he returned home later that evening, I chatted a lot more with him about that particular career, and I thought, this is something that I'm going to give a try. So I guess I found my way eventually, and I do chronicle that in my book about how I ended up applying to the Ontario Provincial Police. And I knew that there wasn't many women, particularly in the OPP. I knew there was only a handful at that time, but I thought, this is something that I want to give it a try. Nothing ventured, nothing gained. Pat Uppers here, she knows my mother, we're neighbors. And my mother's the eternal optimist, is like, what, if you don't like it, you can just go on to something else. So that's the way that I approached it. And part of the selection process, so I moved through, the exams and that type of thing, and then there comes a time when the police, as they do today, will go and visit, like they call them home visits. So this is to see what, supports. This is a stressful job. these young people are going into. You want to make sure that they have support at home, whether it be a spouse or family members. In my case, I was only 21. I was still living at home after I finished at university. So anyways, I just happened to be home on the day that the OPP officer came to speak with my family or with my parents. So he didn't expect that I would be there, I guess, either. So, I mean, obviously, he was not there to see me or to talk to me. I'd already gone through my interviews. But, you know, I kind of and again, a visual person, I remember just hanging around in the kitchen and listening to what he was asking them and how they were replying. And, of course, they were very supportive. But when he finished and he was getting ready to leave, I asked if I could speak to him again. And he said, yes. I said, I just had a couple of questions. And I can't remember what we stepped out of the room from the living room. We went out into the kitchen. And I said, you know, I just have a couple of questions. I said, I can't remember what the earlier questions were, but I do remember my last one of him. And I asked him, or I kind of said, there's not that many women in the OPP, is there? And he said, no, there isn't. And he said, and I asked him, what do you think of women in policing? And he said, honestly? So I would learn later in my career that when somebody says honestly, you're probably not going to like what follows. And he told me, he said, I don't think you or any other woman has any place in policing, nor do I think that you should be allowed to be a woman in the OPP. So, you know, I guess my philosophy was, ask the question, you got to settle for the answer. That's his, and he did say that was his opinion. But when he left, I thought, oh, that's, you know, I don't have a hope in heck of getting anything. And about 2 weeks later, I got a letter in the mail that I had been accepted to the OPP. So that obviously the one individual's opinion, as he said this, he just provides the information from my family. They're not interested in his opinion about women doing this kind of work. But as I say, I've always learned that, you know, you ask people for an honest answer, you get an honest answer, they're entitled to their opinion. So my first assignment was to Port Credit Detachment, which is at QEW and Highway 10. Now, I never had a car when I was in university. I did, you know, occasionally drive my parents' car, but so my idea of a big, you know, highway is, you know, going out on the main road in Ennismore there that has 2 paved lanes going each direction, or one going each direction. So then I arrived to Port Credit Detachment, where I think I have in some locations 16 lanes. So Highway 427, up around the airport, out to Mississauga, up to the north end of the city. So just to tell you one little story about my time in Port Credit was, I was always a bit of a nervous driver. And to this day, I'm still not the world's best driver. But if you were to ever ask, I think, a police officer, what is one of the more exciting things that happens when you're a new recruit? One of the big things for me, and others have agreed with me when I speak sometimes, is the first day you get to drive the cruiser alone. So you don't have a coach officer anymore. You don't have anybody looking over your shoulder. This is your car. So I remember coming into work. It was a day shift, and I was hoping that I would get the north end of the detachment area, which was Highway 27, because there was one lane going north and one lane going south. So I was really hoping that's the one that I would get. But when I arrived at work, my sergeant called me into the office and he said, you know, are you excited? You know, first, yes, I am. I'm really excited. I said, do you have something for me to do? And he said, yeah, I do. He said, I need you to deliver some documents to Osgoode Hall. I had no idea what Osgoode Hall was. But anyways, back in those days, of course, I got out the big street map, found out where it was that he wanted me to go, and I realized that now it's like 7:45 in the morning, like there's bumper-to-bumper cars out the window of the detachment. Now I've got to go all the way down into downtown Toronto to deliver, and it's rather urgent that these documents get there ASAP. So I started down QEW East, down into to the city. Took the Gardner Expressway, you know, by Exhibition Stadium, that kind of thing. And I took a big roundabout ramp on York Street. And I had looked at the map before I left, and I knew that York Street was 4 lanes going north. And I thought, this is perfect. At least it's not, again, I'm a nervous driver at this time. So my drive down is relatively uneventful. I don't run into anything. No one runs into me. And I go up my 4 lanes, and it is bumper to bumper all the way up on York Street. I get to the top of the street, and Osgood Hall is right there, so I just quickly park, put the 4-ways on. It's a cruiser, I mean, who's going to tow it? So I run across the street with my little manila envelope, run up the steps, go in, I deliver my package, and I'm just so nervous. I just do a quick U-turn around, and I head southbound on York Street. So now I have 4 lanes of traffic coming towards me, and I'm committed. There's no way out. So I thought, there's only one thing to do. Lights, siren, and the most serious look I could get on my face. So I went down York Street through all of the intersections going the wrong way. It was like the parting of the Red Sea. But I got all the way back down to Lakeshore Boulevard, took the ramp up, turned off the lights, and just continued on the way. So anyways, that was my first day driving by myself. So when you see those cool dude cops that are totally in control and that kind of thing, think of the stories of some of us in the background. So anyways, jumping ahead, and I have stories in the book there of some funny things and some not so funny things that happen to police officers when they're doing what we would call traffic. That was a traffic detachment. And I was getting restless after about 4 years and looking for something new. And I was still single. And on the board, you know, there was lots of, assignment boards or bulletin boards in the office. This is where there's different postings coming available. And I wanted to stay in the Toronto area. I liked the lifestyle of a single young woman in Toronto. And I wasn't too interested in going too far away from home either. Obviously, all of my family are still here in Peterborough. But there was a job ad that came up, and I thought, this does sound interesting, and it was for the first woman to work undercover drug enforcement in the OPP. So I guess in hindsight I was pretty naive, but at that time there was a TV show on that I thought, for one thing, that I could meet a really good looking guy if I went to work at a place like this. But it was called Miami Vice. You remember Miami Vice? Sonny Crockett? Oh my God. So maybe I could meet a Sonny Crockett kind of guy, you know, like the Ferraris and the penthouses and the jewelry and the travel and all this kind of stuff. So as luck would have it, I got the job. But I didn't meet Sonny Crockett, and for probably most of the next 5 years, I spent in places like Atikokan and Fort Francis and Dryden and working street level drugs. But as I say, I joke around about that, but I really, really enjoyed my time working undercover, and it was back in an era when it was truly like taking candy from babies. No one thought a woman would ever be an undercover officer, so the job was pretty easy for me, and again, I have some stories of that in the book. I won't go into any detail. After about 5 years working undercover, actually a friend of mine called me and said, have you seen the bulletin board in your office? And I said, no, and he said, go have a look. So what it was is for an ad to go on a course. And the course was a year long, which was a long time to be away, and it was in a place that I thought it was actually called Quantico, but it was called Quantico. I would find out later. So it was the FBI, and they were offering the Ontario Provincial Police an opportunity to have one officer trained. And it would be a year 10 months to a year that the person would be away from home. At that time, I was involved in a serious relationship, and he was supportive, his kids were supportive, and so I thought, I'm going to give this a try, and it was called Unknown Offender Profiling was the name of the course. And so I thought, well, I'm going to give it a try. So in September of 1991, I drove for 12 hours south. Quantico's about an hour south of Washington, D.C. And I can say that probably my professional life and my personal life was forever changed going on that course. So now you see all of these TV programs with, you know, pretty much every detective show or whatever either has a central character or peripheral character that is a criminal profiler. But I knew nothing of this work when I first got there. And to give credit to the FBI in an era where police never wanted to show any kind of weakness, the FBI, and this particular was called the Behavioral Sciences Unit, so that's where I would work for the next 10 months with the largest class they'd ever trained in 1 year, which was 7 officers. So we were the largest class they ever had. So myself from Canada, an officer from the Netherlands, from The Hague, 2 officers from Australia, and 3 officers or agents, I guess they would call themselves, with national police agencies in the US. So that was our class for the next 10 months. But when I was saying there before, in an era where police did not want to show any weakness, these officers knew only too well the effects of stress in the workplace. And I would realize after being there several months that about 1/3 of their employees were off on stress-related illnesses when I was there. And to describe the kind of work that we were trained to do and the kind of cases that we would investigate would be, you know, it's hard to describe, and I'm obviously not going to go into details, but it's the worst of the worst of the worst that humankind is capable of doing to another person. And I had never worked on these types of cases before, and certainly it was an eye-opening experience for me. But those officers really spent, before we even ever started into the academic part or to the practical, where officers are bringing in cases to the FBI, and we would sit in on those. Remember the Tylenol tampering? So that was right around the era that I was there. Ted Bundy had not been captured, so there was a lot going on in Florida and California. Charles Manson, that one had just ended. So some of these very high-profile cases, and these agents were going into those institutions and interviewing those serial killers. So their perspectives on the thinking and the types of individuals that they were speaking with. And of course, you know, they were really researched their cases or their investigations. These serial killers, as you can well imagine, some fib, some exaggerate, that kind of thing. So these agents were able to educate me firsthand on what they were hearing from these individuals that chose to tell the truth. The training there as well is a very practical, so as I say, you're getting academic training, but you're also practically getting cases. Sometimes you would have serial crime cases, 5 or 6 in one day. So you would start at 7 or 8 in the morning and you could go till 8 or 9 or 10 or 11 o'clock at night. That's how busy that unit was. There was a couple opportunities that I had that stand out and for me, and one was to be able to go to New York City to work with the NYPD, was where my practicum, I guess you would call it. So I had my training, and now I was going out in a U.S. city that had one of the highest violent crime cases in the country at that time, and to work with them in their forensic identification unit, actually. So that was a phenomenal experience for me. I worked midnights in the Bronx, where hard for us to believe, and as you may know here, if there's a major crime, if something should happen here in Peterborough, that crime scene would be held for days or weeks while each, you know, little piece of evidence was examined. When I was out with that crew they had 20 minutes per crime. Homicide, arson, abduction, 20 minutes. Because there was just so much crime and so little manpower to do those kinds of scenes. It's unbelievable to think that they would be being tasked with that much pressure on them. And if they did not have a suspect in 24 hours, the case was cold and boxed. So, as I say, for someone coming from a country that had the opportunities and certainly made me appreciate the opportunities that we had here, it was still a real education on what you can accomplish when circumstances are such that this is all that you have. The other part of that story that was impactful for me, there was another gentleman doing that ride along the same week that I was there. His name is Robert De Niro. I just gapped. Sorry, that's my senior moment for the presentation. So Robert De Niro was researching a movie, and he was there for those weeks as well. And he was a very interesting gentleman, probably one of the nicest people I've ever met in my entire life. Very compassionate man, and he didn't go in the cruisers. He had an old '64 rusted out Chevy, and they gave him a police radio, and he drove his own car. And when he has a baseball cap on and he's driving a car that's all rusted out, he rarely got recognized. I only recall him getting recognized once at a crime scene, and if he got recognized, he left right away. But he became very instrumental for my career. But I don't have time to tell you that little story, but it's outlined quite well in that book there if you want to listen in. So I finished that course after 10 months. I returned to Canada, to return home. And again, I talk about that lots in the book, and just some of my experiences in those very early days. But one of the first calls I got, the phone rang, and the fellow introduced himself, and I didn't know him, but I certainly knew who he was when he gave me his name. His name was Vince Bevan. And Vince was a lead investigator, a young woman who lived in Burlington, 14 years of age, had been abducted, probably outside her home, and her body was found in St. Catharines. And another young lady by the name of Kristen French her body had just been found. And the cases were unsolved, but they were pretty confident it was the same person. So that was pretty much one of the very first cases that I got involved in. Impactful to me to this day to be involved in that case. And just to have that experience of the emotion that is felt by a team who's searching frantically trying to get somebody back alive, and what those teams go through when they are not successful and getting the missing person back alive. But probably the more impactful for me, and this is when I say on a personal level, is to become friends with Doug and Donna French. And Doug and Donna and I worked together on many initiatives. They were very instrumental in many of the successes that I would have down the road in starting a behavioral sciences unit, etc., within the Ontario Provincial Police. But when you would visit with Doug and Donna, obviously your conversations would drift to Kristen, ultimately. But they were not the memories that you and I have of knowledge of that story. So it was about family. It was about things that they did together, or, I remember one time being at their house and sitting in the backyard, and, there's the pool that I know Kristen, was swam in. Kristen was, it was a blended family. Doug French had older children, and then they'd had a son and a daughter together, and Kristen was the baby. But I remember talking, and I can't remember what it was I said to Donna, but all these years later, this is going to be, at least 10 years after, I said something, and she started to cry. And I apologized. I said, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset you. She goes, no, Kate, I cry every day. It's okay. And that's 10 years later. But for them, the stories and the stories that I have shared in my book, theirs and others, how victims' families choose to move forward and what they do with their lives, or what they're able to accomplish in their lives with the catalyst of this horrific negative incident. And if I can just share one story that Doug and Donna shared that night when we were sitting outside in their backyard, and we came inside, and Donna said, "I don't think I've shown you this." And anyways, she told me the story that she had been at an art exhibit. Kristen's body had been found at this point, but she had been at some kind of art show in southwestern Ontario. I don't know if it was in St. Catharines or not, but anyway, she said she came across this. There was a painter there, and she painted blonde-haired children with wings, so blonde, sort of cherub children with these wings. And Donna asked her, she said, like, even the prints were really expensive, and she said, like, do you have any dark-haired angels? And she said, no, and they're all little girls. And she said, no, I just use my own children as my models, and they're all blonde, so. She said, no, I don't do dark-haired children. So Donna said, she just wrote her name and address and phone number and stuff on a piece of paper. She said, if you ever do a blonde-haired, she said, I love your paintings. She said, if you ever do a blonde-haired angel, would you please give me a call and I'll get one of the prints. So that was it, and Donna never heard anything. And then about 6 or 8 weeks later, there's a knock on the door, and it's a delivery person with a great big package like this. And Donna opens it up, and it's a dark-haired cherub angel with a likeness very close to Kristen. And there's a note on the back, and it said that, I won't have this verbatim, but it said that, I apologize because I did not know who you were until you left, and I realized why you asked for a dark-haired angel. And she said, so here's your dark-haired angel, and it was an original, and she said, and just so that you know, there will be no prince. So those are the kinds of stories that Doug and Donna French share with people. The acts of kindness, and generosity, and compassion, but yet at the same time, sometimes sad, and I've heard this, and you might not realize this, but or for some of you, everyone in this room has endured tragedy. Some people don't do well being good friends in tragedy. They feel lost. They don't know what to say, what to do, whether it be illness or a tragic death, and those friends drift away. And that was always very painful for Doug and Donna, that things that they would normally get invited to, they didn't get invited to anymore. And she said, you know, we forgive them. We know it's uncomfortable. We acknowledge it's uncomfortable, perhaps they associate us with something that's happened. Now we're talking like 10 years later, and those friends have never drifted back to them, whether it be now from embarrassment or whatever. But she said, the nicest thing is we know so many more people that are so vibrant and active in our lives because of what's happened to Kristen. And those people would never come into our lives if it hadn't have been for that catalyst of that tragedy. But as I say, those and some others that I share in the book are ones in which, you know, many, and this is, as Mark mentioned, I chair a national board for victims, and that there are so many stories like that yes, there are tragedies and there are horrible things that happen. In the book, I talk about the abduction and murder of Christopher Stevenson from Shoppers World in the early 80s, and the legislation in Ontario today bears his name. He was murdered by Joseph Fredericks in Brampton all those years ago, but again, a family that just never gave up. It's a difficult decision for a family to politicize the loss of a loved one, but if it can change and make the streets and communities safer, these people are willing to go those lengths. And so that's what I'm always thankful for in the work that I do now, particularly for a charitable organization. I can pick up the phone and call any of those families, and they'll come, they'll do a presentation, whatever. They're very supportive. So after that particular investigation as I moved through the years of my career. Probably, I guess the second last one that I was involved in was the abduction and murder of Tori Stafford in Woodstock, Ontario, just a few years ago. That again it was something actually I learned at Quantico. And when I was at Quantico, there was only one Canadian case came in while I was there, and it was abduction of a little boy. His name was Michael Dunahee, and he lived in Victoria. Some of you are familiar with this story. Michael is still missing today. He was just 4 years old at the time that he went missing in 1991, so he's an adult. If you talk to his family today, they hope he's with a family that loves him and cares for him and needed a child and didn't know how to bring a child into their lives, and somehow that Michael's in their lives and maybe he's married and has grandchildren. I might not share that perspective, but I would never take it away from his family to believe that that's as much a hope as anybody else's thoughts might be. But anyways, when Michael's case came into Quantico, Michael was 4 years old. He lived in Victoria, British Columbia. He was at a playground. His mother was playing football, and he just went over to the swings. It was in a school. I've actually visited that for writing my book. I actually went back to that scene all these years later, like 20-some years later. But anyways, Michael disappeared from that school playground. Nobody saw him. He left his parents' car. He went across in behind 2 or 3 cars, and there was this teeter-totter, and swings and that kind of thing. And he never made it. He never made it to the other side. His dad was there. He had a little sister. His dad was putting the little girl into the stroller, and the mom was putting her cleats on to play football. And they looked up, and he was gone. So that case was impactful to me because they flew seven or nine investigators down on a BC government jet. I actually went out to Manassas, Virginia, and picked them up at a little small airport out there and brought them back to Quantico. And they had a consultation with a team of agents, FBI agents, particularly involved in child violence against children. But the thing that really stuck with me all those years is that actually I do talk a little bit about the case. I don't give any details. I don't tie. It's still an open case. I honor the confidentiality of my services and my involvement back all those years, so I still don't publicly talk about any of the details of the case. But that just when the officers were finished, and those officers were broken, really, when they came to Quantico. They were devastated. They had done everything they could over the last 3 or 4 weeks. Nothing was working. They weren't getting any tips, anything like that. And I thought it was very intuitive of the lead agent on that case. And when we finished up and, everybody's packing up their banker's boxes and that kind of thing, the lead guy says, "Could you just sit down for a minute?" And he obviously could pick up, they're drained, they're not sleeping, they haven't seen their families, and they're just exhausted. And he said, you need to realize that there may in fact come a time when you're going to have to box this case up without it being solved. And he said, I just want you to remember that you have done your very best job, and that if you get Michael home, that's phenomenal. But if you don't, you still are doing the best possible job you could. So when I think back to going and visiting the officers, and when we didn't have Tori's body back, but we knew that she wasn't going to be alive, or to go to Russell Williams in Belleville to meet with the investigators there when Jessica Lloyd, we knew, was not going to be coming home. I tried to have those same conversations with those officers, that this did not end the way that any of us wanted to, but it doesn't mean all of us still didn't do a fantastic job. So the Russell Williams case, and just Marie-France Como and Jessica Lloyd, that was the last time I visited an investigative group, went out for dinner with them and had one of those conversations. And I was, at the point in my career, I'm in my 33rd year, and just nothing is really feeling like it's time to go. But then one day I got a call from a young man up in Thunder Bay. I'd never met him, but he was my cousin. And we had corresponded over the years. He thought he might like to get into policing. And so he called me and he said, "I'm calling to tell you I got accepted on the OPP." And he said, "Can I come and see you?" Because we talked on the phone and internet and email and that kind of thing over the years. So he, a few months later, came to the OPP there in, in Aurelia, and came in and looked just like his dad. And it was a pleasure to meet him. And I just thought, as he's talking, it was like maybe 20 minutes or something, I thought, if this guy's coming in, then it's time for me to go. This is a guy I want to put my money on. And so anyways, when he was leaving, he said, "Are you around, September 4th or something like that," I think it was. And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Would you give me my badge when I graduate? Because you've been such an influence on me." And he said, and I said, "Yeah, I'd love to." And he walked out the door, I walked down the hall, and I said, "I think I found my reason." And I said, and this is probably like June, July. And I went down the hall and just asked my administrative assistant, I said, "If you count back all the time, that I have owed to me and my vacation and that, when would I be finished?" And it was the next Friday. So I was waiting for my Oprah aha moment, and I got it. And so I was there on September 4th, and the last official duty I had was giving my cousin his badge. And I keep track of him, unbeknownst to him. He's been in the Sioux Lookout. He's a guy from the north who wanted to stay in the north. He's got 2 young kids now, and he's doing a hell of a job, and it comes as no surprise to me because, as I say, he's a wonderful young man, comes from a wonderful family. Just to kind of finish off the story is, it was the fall, and I thought, I'm going to do what every new retiree does. I'm heading for Florida. So I'm booked in for 6 months, and maybe I won't offend too many of you here because you're here in the snow. But after 6 months of life in Florida and 4:30 dinners, bingo every night. This is honest to God truth, doing Aquasize to Barbara Streisand The Way We Were. I thought, I don't ever want to do this again as long as I live. So I came home, that's when I kick-started the career again, and got my private investigator's license, and started back into and more recently, probably more work than I need, but most of my work now is workplace related harassment, human rights, discrimination cases, and writing this book was a big part of that. So I got that was kind of fun. Just to quickly just sort of finish with the book story is I never would have ever thought that I would ever write a book. But after I came home from Florida, I got a call from Random House Canada. And I don't know if any of you know the author Stevie Cameron. Stevie writes a lot of stuff. Stevie's a very good friend of mine. She's the first journalist that interviewed me when I came back from Quantico, and she worked for the Globe and Mail. And we've been friends to today. And her daughter, if you see in the book, I do a lot of consulting for TV shows and that kind of thing. So Rookie Blue, Flashpoint, that kind of thing. That's Stevie Cameron's daughter is the producer of those shows. So anyway, so I've done some of that consulting, and actually just recently sold the rights to my book too. So we never know what might happen with that in the future. But as I say, I never would have thought that I would write a book. I'm not a writer. I love to tell stories, but I was never a writer. But anyways, I got invited to a nice they said, you know, we heard about you through Stevie, and we think this might be something we'd be interested to, you know, publish, and could you come for lunch? So, you know, there's enough cheap cop in me that, okay, I got a nice free lunch in downtown Toronto, let's go. And so anyways, they met with me. It was 2 women. Appetizers hadn't even arrived yet, and it was already going south. And they said, like, you know, Bernardo and Russell Williams and McCafferty and all of these offenders' names, and like you have a perspective. And I said, well, I would never write about those people, ever. As a matter of fact, not trying to offend them too much, but I think there's way too much written about that. And I said, why, how come nobody wants to write about the good guys? What about the people? What about those families? What about the survivors? How come their stories don't get told? How come people are so interested in the bad guys? And they said, well, could you write a story about the good guys? Yeah, I think I could. But I said, give me a little bit of time here, because I need to make sure that I can do this the way I want to do it. So every one of the families, every one that I write about in that book, I went to see personally, including flying to Victoria to speak with Michael Dunleavy's parents. And I said, this is the opportunity I have to share the other stories about some of these cases that Canadians will know about. And every one of those families said yes. And sadly, every one of those families said, no one's ever asked before. So anyways, so that's how the book came about. I was a bit rocky. Those early drafts were a bit of a mess. You know, I'm a cop who's used to writing down what my mileage is, what the number of my cruiser is in the morning, where, you know, who I'm talking to, who I'm interviewing. And so anyways, I got a call probably about 6 months in to see those 2 publishers, and I thought, no, I don't think this is going to be good. So anyways, I went to the meeting, and they said, well, we have a suggestion for you. We think you need a co-writer or a ghostwriter. Like, we won't even put their name on it. We'll just you need help with the way that you write. So they said, what do you think? And I said, well, and they had purchased the rights. They had given me an advance, so I was very blessed to know that at least the book was going to be published before I even started to write it. I said, if you're asking me, or I mean, if you're telling me, like, to me, they bought the product, so I'm to produce a product to their satisfaction. If you're telling me the answer is yes, if you're asking me, no. You need to be more patient with me, and you need to guide me more in this writing stuff. Like, they always said I went straight to the action. Well, as a cop, that's what you do. You're doing Crown briefs for lawyers. You go straight to the action. So, like, introduce your story. Talk to, about a little bit about your personal life, what other things are going on. And I said, okay, help me with that. So when you read that book, so the answer, they did say, okay, well, let's do it that way. And I'm really glad I backed into them on that one, because when you hear me talk, it's going to be just like, or when you read, it's just like I'm talking to you here now. And that might not be all flowery and wonderful. I pride myself, I don't think anyone's going to have to look up any word in the dictionary that I have in my book. And I do remember and Pat actually I brought her a copy once it got published, but it has some profanity in it. That's not something that I would normally have, and it has to do mostly at my time or wholly in my time working undercover. But I figure, my 89-year-old mother said, Kate, if that's what you said, put it in the book. She's a good Catholic gal, so I figure if my mother says it's okay, because that's what I had to say to fit into that environment. But anyway, so yes, so the book was published, and I was very blessed with wonderful promotions at the time, and go to across Canada, different locations, and do speaking engagements and media and that kind of thing. And it was, as I say, I think the best thing of all is getting contacted by victims and just saying, sometimes they just say, I'm a victim and I just want to say thank you. So that's the biggest, as I say, something that means the most to me. And then so now I live in Peterborough, and life is wonderful in Peterborough. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Kate, on behalf of the members of Probus Peterborough, I would like to thank you for a most interesting and informative talk. Your experiences and accomplishments are very impressive, and I compliment you for that.
Thank you.
Personally, I, for one, am very anxious and looking forward to reading your autobiography and bestseller, Crime Scene.
Thank you.
Please accept this as a
thank
token
you.
of our appreciation.
Thank you.
I'll just add as well is that if you think that that was a really great idea to call the book Crime Scene, is if you go driving into Lindsay off, was that Highway 7, and you turn in, there's a Crime Stoppers sign that says crime scene and a question mark. That's where I got the idea for the book.